Welcome back, New World Degenerates. Slightly different video today, as I will be going over at least one tip to help you counter or beat each weapon in the game I think is useful to know. Feel free to comment below in the comments your tips for some of this weaponry, and I will include some extra stuff for the chads that are already subscribed and commented on my community posts on what they have issues dealing with. Because we all know they already have daddy issues if they're subbed to me. Before we go any further, I just want to preference this by saying the way to win fights is to manage your CDs and trade with opponents effectively, not spunk your cooldowns up the bedroom wall to your latest cat-girl porn. Weirdos. Depending on your build in the situation, you wouldn't just fly in without CDs mashing left-click on cunts, unless you're in heavy armor. But it is well documented that if you run heavy, you are a certified pussy and probably on Epstein's list anyway.
I love fucking kids.
First up, we have got one of the strongest weapons in the game currently, Sword and Board SNS. The aim of the game here is to break their block and bait out their juicy abilities like Shield Bash and Shield Rush. Whilst you are smashing them in their front bottom, they are going to try and slap you with one of the abilities I mentioned before, and it is all about just being ready for this. When they waste them, that is the time to push. Next up, we are dealing with the dev's favorite weapon, the cunts that think they're this, but are really no more threatening than the birthday candles at your niece's 7th birthday you and your boyfriend went to. First off, the easiest and most obvious way to abuse these fire femboys is when they try and run away like the pathetic bitches they are, if they try and burn out right next to you. It's the easiest opportunity to give them a good punch in the fart box. Either take that opportunity for damage, or the best thing to do is any crowd control effect will cancel burnout and put that shit on CD. Now briefly for the numerous comments on my community posts on dealing with flamethrowers. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, you need to manage cooldowns effectively. If you are aware they use flamethrower, do not engage them with your get out of jail ability, such as Fleshy, Leaping Strike, etc. You want these to get away after you have spent your others on them, ideally CC, as this puts a tiny cooldown on flamethrower if they are interrupted, and then is your time to strike, burst them if they are light, or whittle them down engaging and disengaging if they are proper thick boy nonce and a heavy flamethrower user. You can also use flamethrower to trigger free effects on you, like shirking heals or fortification. This is also worth bearing in mind. My favorite thing to do against rapiers when they riposte is to counter-riposte them. I think that shit is funny. However, obviously, we're not all running rapiers, so here's a few other good things to know about riposte. First off, after you have triggered it, it is dodgeable if you dodge immediately. You can also block it with SNS or flail so long as you triggered it with a regular attack and not an ability. However, if you are not using them, it's always best to literally assume if someone is running with a rapier out when you catch them, the first thing they are going to do is riposte, especially if they are a healer. So don't be a slow moron, and make sure you're not caught off guard. Now for my one tip against flail is for Vortex. It's worth knowing that the first spin of Vortex they are still possible to hit with crowd control and stop them running away like Ezra Miller post-assault. And if you're anything like me, you find chasing after turbo puss-pusses boring. Next up, we have the Pokeboy, a very commonly used weapon, and depending who is wielding it is a strong old Pokeboy at that. My one tip against this bad boy is to watch out for Skewer, because if they have the weapon perk, Enfeebling Skewer, this applies a weaken to you that basically takes you out of the game for 8 seconds. So obviously avoid this if possible to do so. It has a pretty obvious charge-up animation that looks like that. If you get hit by this, you need to cleanse yourself ASAP Rocky. Otherwise, just do not engage until the debuff falls off, because you will lose worse than the folks that invested in Crypto Zoo.
Yeah. Bet you never been this close to a celebrity before, huh?
Now for a favorite on my server for sure, the Greatsword, or Noob Slayer 9000. Because if you are getting killed by this shit outside of a chaotic situation, you're probably a monkey for real. My one tip for this video is that after the first hit of Skyward Slash, the weaker hit that staggers you, you can always just roll out of the second more devastating attack that also applies disease. Never block this. Always dodge, as it does a ton of stamina damage. Next up, we have the premier most popular weapon of the whole game with people who think they're this pretty boy. The main thing you want to avoid, in my opinion, when fighting a bow player is actually poison shot if they are running it, because it's common for bow players to be running 150 intelligence these days, so this can stack up to a ton of damage that you want to avoid. So don't go walking through that shit on the floor, and if you get slapped with it, look to cleanse yourself or pre-po a regen pot to deal with the damage. Otherwise, dodge. Duck and weave, boy. Next to the party, we have the heavy hitter, the Musket. This isn't that widely ran by players. However, there remains a dedicated few who are pretty cracked with it. This tip is simple, yet I believe it is one a lot of people don't know, or I don't see doing anyway. Traps.
It's a trap!
It's pretty simple. You can destroy them with ranged attacks. Anyone who saw the flesh trick with them too. We'll keep that one quiet. Now, the dev's least favorite weapon, which I actually think is in a good place now, but nevertheless we have the Blunder Bust. My one tip for this, which is always easier said than done, because it is an easy skill shot to land, is avoiding net shot. Especially too, since the weapon perk for this ability is pretty insane. The way to dodge this is to just always expect it from them as their first ability if they are far away, or their last if they are close. If you are running, you can keep turning towards them with a block, or a well-timed dodge. Now a wee bonus for those who asked on the community post, that you could do too if you just subscribed like these chads have. When diving a BB player, you gotta expect them to blow their load quicker than your first time with your uncle on your infamous fishing trip. So what are you gonna do to deflect that absolute cum rocket that BB has up its sleeve? Well, sure, you could hit them with one thing in their face to get them to try to combo you, immediately try to dodge through it, and mash their face whilst they have to reload. You can achieve the same thing blocking their combo, which doesn't do a huge amount of stamina damage, it's worth noting. And I would rather get block broken than take a BB's load right in the face like I bet you guys do. Filthy bastards. But you can also use things like repost, etc. to get around this. Next up we got Ice Gauntlet, and we have the Rising Star ability Wind Chill, which combined with the new artifact Ice Gauntlet and the Wind Chill weapon perk can be pretty lethal and is easy to use. So you can for sure expect to see a ton more folks using this. It pushes you away from the user too, so unless you have a grid ability that does a crap ton of damage, I recommend to just get the F out of dodge and let them go full blast-wise into thin air before re-engaging. It is worth noting to that using this ability also gives them grit, so don't be trying to crowd control them out of it. We've had Ice Gauntlet, now we got the Void Gauntlet, and we are looking at Scream in this case. This is another all too simple tip, avoiding Scream. This is because if you're running Scream, then surely you're running the weapon perk too, which is one of the strongest single plague abilities in the game. Spotting someone running up to you with a VG in hand. Well, you guess it, they're undoubtedly coming to scream your ass, so be ready to block, dodge, or whatever else to avoid it unless you want to catch a nasty case of whatever your dad had. Now for dealing with arguably one of the strongest abilities in the game from the Great Axe, Gravity Well. It's super simple to get out of Grav Well just with a couple of jumps, but be sure not to panic and mash that dodge keybind, because that won't help you as much as leave you gray barred and dead. You can double jump out no matter your armor weight too. It's also good to know if you want to put yourself at even further distance, you can jump once and use a movement ability to get out too. Now for the penultimate tip, if you can call it that, Warhammer, Chathammer, Mjolnir. The only thing I really have to say about this is the abilities are slow and very obviously choreographed, so they are incredibly easy to avoid. However, if you do get caught, you are going straight down to Pound Town. It's worth noting that when being caught in stuns, some of your folks' builds might have methods of getting out of them. For example, Hatchet's Berserk, 300 con weapon swap, etc. Beyond this, there isn't much more to say about Warhammer, other than happy bonking. Lastly, we are left with Hatchet. Ever since they took away Berserk, canceling the weapon hasn't been quite the same, but I still use it from time to time as a throwing hatchet build for fun, or alongside my flail because Infected Throw is slept on with how good it is. However, my tip for this would be to remember that not only does Berserk get users out of stuns and other hard CC, it also makes them immune to staggers. Like mentioned before, if you guys have any burning desires to share some tips, please do so in the comments. Make sure you folks sub like the other chats. And maybe when I do something like this in future, you can add your own questions to it through one of my community posts. We got a fresh build video coming very soon. See you next time, sucker.